The only way that we hold on is if the folks watching this show go to tedcruz.org right now, go online to tedcruz.org, make a contribution of $5, $10, $25, $50, $100, because my race, my support is not from the big money special interests in Washington, D.C. It is from constitutional conservatives across the country who go to tedcruz.org and who help give me the resources to withstand $100 million from these left-wing Democrats and Marxists who are trying to invade this country and destroy this country.
Republican Senator and podcaster Ted Cruz is currently running a fraught re-election campaign, but money is tight, or so we thought. Turns out Ted's Truth and Courage PAC just reported receiving nearly $250,000 from iHeartMedia.
But now, with iHeart stepping in to distribute and promote, the reach is going to be that much broader. And I think that's really exciting, because this was always about really equipping our listeners. If you're going to battle to save the country, if you're going to take on the cultural Marxist, if you're going to take on the socialist and the people coming at everything that built America, you need the tools, you need the information, you need to know what's going on. And the vision of this podcast was always, we're going to give you as much of those tools as possible so that you're prepared and you know the inside story.
iHeartMedia hosts Ted's podcast, which means that they do the marketing and promotion for it too. iHeartMedia also happens to be a registered lobbyist. The FEC filing reveals that Ted's senatorial campaign received $215,000 from iHeartMedia Management Services last month. The Truth and Courage PAC, by the way, has nothing to do with podcasting. It was specifically created to support Ted's current political campaign. But here's the thing. If iHeartMedia is a registered federal lobbyist, it's not supposed to be donating to senators, and senators are not supposed to be accepting gifts from registered lobbyists. A complaint was filed in 2022 with the Senate Ethics Committee over the partnership between iHeartMedia and Ted Cruz, but the complaint was ultimately dismissed on the grounds that, quote, Senator Cruz receives no financial benefit for Verdict. Verdict is the name of his podcast, by the way. They compared the podcast being hosted on the platform as being no different from Cruz making an appearance on network or cable television. But even though Cruz is allegedly not getting paid directly for doing the podcast or by iHeartMedia, iHeart is funding and marketing the whole thing. Additionally, ads from the podcast are generating revenue. As of about a month ago, Ted was filming video for his podcast in the iHeart studio, and he was dropping episodes 3 times a week. I didn't realize until covering this story right now that he was podcasting so often. And I just checked his audio episodes on Spotify, and he's dropping hour-long episodes nearly every day or every other day.
People might think this is weird or petty, but I'm going to talk. I think it's weird for a U.S. Senator to do 5 podcast episodes a week. Yeah. I'm not wrong,
That's right? No, that's right. I mean, it's very time consuming. Like when I appear on a podcast, it takes time. But being the host, and he normally does 3 a week. So that was actually news for me that he was up to 5. He's a media personality. He's not serious about being a senator.
I feel like there's some level at which maybe you'll help. If you beat him, you help him. Because he really just wants to do that full time, which again, no shade.
Hey,
you know what I mean?
Right,
but I mean, you might be giving him a hand.
Yeah, that's what he wants to do. He's not a serious legislator.
Look, people think podcasters just talking to a mic for an hour, and yes, maybe some of them do. But there is a lot of work that goes into producing a single podcast episode, even for the host, even if there's a whole team of people working behind the scenes. That is an awful lot of time and an awful lot of work for someone to put into a podcast, especially when that person is supposed to be a U.S. Senator. My senator. Anyway, even if all of that is above board somehow, why did iHeartMedia put so much money into the senator's political action committee that was set up for the express purpose of funding his re-election campaign?
This episode of Verdict with Ted Cruz is being brought to you by Jobs, Freedom, and Security PAC.
iHeartMedia has reportedly spent $50 million on lobbying efforts since 2003 in the hopes of influencing legislation around data privacy, radio ownership, and the Communications Decency Act. And in 2022, at the time that iHeartMedia picked up Cruz's podcast and partnered with the senator, iHeart had spent over $3.5 million in lobbying. 2 of the bills they lobbied for went before the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and Ted Cruz happens to be the highest-ranking Republican on that committee. He kept his seat by just a hair when he ran against Beto O'Rourke in 2018, and I'll remind you, Beto was running as a progressive Democrat. He won by a 2.6% margin, making it the closest Texas Senate race in 40 years. Since then, his popularity has only dwindled. This time, he's up against Colin Allred, and let me tell you, Colin Allred is hustling. I am squarely in his sphere of influence, so I have already been getting ads from this guy on social media for months. He emails me almost daily, and he probably texts me more than any other single person in my life texts me. So maybe the writing's on the wall. Maybe Ted Cruz knows that his future as an elected political figure is not bright, so he's working on his backup plan. He'll have to work a bit harder though. He's currently ranked at 31 on Apple and number 43 on Spotify in the news podcast charts. That said, he still brought in a hefty bit of money through those ad sales, more than his senatorial salary. And now I'm remembering that he still gets paid a 6-figure salary with tax dollars to be a senator while he is just being a podcaster instead. Texas State Representative James Tallarico is hitting the Texas campaign trail with Colin Allred, the Democratic candidate who is hoping to unseat Ted Cruz this November. Tallarico is a bit of a Democratic darling around these parts because he's young, he's well-spoken, and he has a uniquely intersectional perspective. He is a proud practicing Christian and a Democrat. Those 2 things shouldn't be so strange whenever they exist within one person, but our political parties have become so homogenous over the years that a politician who identifies as a practicing Christian is more often than not safely assumed to be a Republican these days. After all, we are the godless left, are we not? That's what I keep hearing, at least. During the campaign stop, Tallarico reminded voting Texans about how terrible Ted Cruz is at being a senator. At this point, it seems as though he just wears the title like a badge while committing unbelievable hours to his podcast. What has he done for Texas lately? It's really hard to say. As Tallarico himself put it on X, quote, "I'm hitting the campaign trail for my friend Colin Allred as he takes on the worst senator in America."
On January 6th, Ted Cruz plotted to overturn the 2020 election and fanned the flames of insurrection. During the blackout that killed 700 of our fellow Texans, Ted Cruz hopped on a flight to Cancun, leaving his constituents and his own dog to shiver in the dark. And when Donald Trump called his wife ugly, Ted Cruz endorsed him anyway. If Ted Cruz will abandon his wife, his dog, and his country, what makes you think he won't abandon you? Colin Allred will never abandon Texas, and he will never abandon you. Right-wing extremists like Ted Cruz have taken over our state, and it's time to take Texas back.
But maybe Ted knows that he's not a very good senator. Maybe he gets that he's not really fit for the job, or maybe he's just lost interest in it. That would explain his lack of campaigning, even after he went out of his way to swindle the judicial system to overturn campaign finance laws. And I get it. I get bored if I do the same thing for too long, too. Ted's ready for more. Maybe the presidency. Of course, he has run for president before, so we know that that's always been within his line of sight. But it appears he's made the right decision for his political career, for his mental health, and for his personal dignity to not challenge Trump for the presidency this year. We all remember how that went back in 2016.
Lying Ted holds that Bible high, puts it down, and then he lies.
Donald is a bully. The man is utterly a moron.
For now, he says that he'll decide whether or not he'll be running in 2028, quote, down the road. Right now, he's committed to helping his friend Donald Trump get elected in November. Alternatively, maybe Ted doesn't really need to campaign in Texas. But that said, while I doubt any Texas Democrats could be convinced to vote for Ted Cruz, Allred's game plan is to convert some of those Republican voters away from Ted. Given the fact that Beto O'Rourke was so successful in doing exactly that in 2018, Allred stands a pretty good chance of making up some numbers, especially in the more rural parts of Texas that rarely see politicians come through. It'll still be a race though. Current polling has Cruz ahead 7 points over Allred. Polling isn't an exact science though, so take that for what it's worth. But on top of everything, Ted Cruz insulted his Texan constituents, specifically his Houstonian constituents, when he fled to Cancun while the rest of us, including his dog, who is ironically named Snowflake, froze in our homes. And to make matters worse, when people rightfully got mad about it, he went to Florida to make fun of the Texans who were mad, again, his constituents. We all remember the image of Ted at Bush International Airport with his not inconspicuous at all Texas flag face mask on. That's going to be a hard one for people to forget about at the voting booth. Anyway, Ted's still podcasting and making the rounds on right-wing media, which I guess is his way of campaigning, speaking directly to his people and to no one else. He's also making headlines for actually attempting to legislate right now, which is making headlines because it's such a rare occurrence. Headlines from the Washington Post and New York Times covering the story have referred to Cruz as an obstructionist who is, quote, better known for defeating bills. The Washington Post said, quote, the Texas senator spent weeks as a bipartisan deal maker, way out of his normal image. Will it be too little too late for Ted? Will Texas finally get a Democratic senator, or will it be 6 more years of Ted? I guess we'll see. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my podcast, Modern Context. Thanks.